Welcome to Research into the Classroom, and today we are joined by Josh Goodrich. Josh is the founder of StepLab and currently the head of product StepLab as well. Josh has been a former leader in school, in secondary, and an English teacher as well. Josh, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us here today.
Dan, thank you very, very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're going to be talking around coaching, the PD offers, responsive coaching. For people new to it, what is the responsive coaching model and how is it different to traditional instructional coaching?
So I always had an issue with coaching as a term because basically it means like about 50 things. And instructional coaching for me doesn't really mean anything. I don't really know. Genuinely don't know what the word instructional is doing in it. I think it means that you're coaching someone on their instruction, but that's about all I can work out. And anything where there's loads of different terms at play means, it's just like classroom teaching. If me and you have a different understanding of what cold calling is, then we're not going to be able to have a sensible conversation or do the technique well, right? So I guess all I was trying to do is clarify what I think good quality teacher coaching means, right? The problem about any form of teacher development is that if you just have one really fixed idea about what it is and you point it at every teacher, it's not going to work equally well for everyone, because each teacher is a really very unique pattern of what they know. So every teacher is going to know loads about some stuff and not very much about other stuff, right? Some teachers will know not very much about a lot of their job. Other teachers will know loads about one specific thing and then be weaker in other areas. That's just the nature of doing a very difficult job. And so all I try to look for is a model of professional development which is effective at responding to where teachers currently are, and therefore is able to provide them with the PD they need to get better. Not more than that, which ends up feeling a bit overbearing, and not less than that, which ends up feeling like they're having to make loads of guesses themselves. That's kind of the philosophy behind what I was trying to do.
So that feels like the person who's doing that responsive coaching has to have a really strong skill set themselves.
I mean, yes, in reality, being a coach is not necessarily an easy thing to do. That's one of the reasons why I set up StepLab is because it's a very important job, but it's also a difficult one. I imagine, Dan, you've done some teacher coaching yourself.
Yeah, I'm definitely on the StepLab wagon.
Okay, good. So it's hard, and so we've had to look for ways of making it as easy as possible. But even with the supports that we offer, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. So I would say that like the total responsive coaching model is quite advanced. The way I talk about it in the book is that actually you can do parts of responsive coaching without needing to do the entire thing. So for example, if I was new to coaching, I might only look to be responsive in the area of working out how much you knew about what you needed to do next, right? So it might be that actually we have a conversation and then I kind of just probe your mental models as to whether you know the solution to the problem. And and that's I can start off there, and then I can look to be responsive in other areas of coaching. It might be helpful for me to. I wonder if it's worth me talking through the structure of the model, and then maybe I'll be able to make that clearer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the way I thought about it when I was trying to write the book was that teachers changing it's a very, very difficult thing to achieve. The status quo for most teachers is not changing. And there's loads of evidence to bear that out. So in the unlikely event, I guess, that a teacher does change, a lot of different things need to be in place to make that likely. The first of these is what I called awareness, and that's that the teacher sees the things they need to see in the classroom to change. A good example of that, Dan, is that we might be focusing on some kind of classroom management. Let's say your use of positive narration. And positive narration, for those who don't know, is spotting a student doing the wrong thing, but fixing that by narrating a student who's done the right thing, right? So you haven't picked up your pen, but instead of just giving you a demerit, I look over at Toby and I say, "Thank you, Toby, you've got your pen in your hand." Now, that's fairly simple sounding technique, requires a teacher to see a serious amount of stuff in the classroom. They need to look at all the students, know what they want to see, which is students having a pen in their hand, spot the students that don't, and spot the students that do. And all of that has to happen before they can make any effective change to their practice. So the first thing that needs to be in place to help a teacher change is whether they're aware of the problem, whether they're aware of the things they need to see in the classroom. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's the first mechanism. The second one is I call insights. And insights is basically just an understanding of why stuff matters. So it might be, Dan, that you saw that a student didn't have a pen in their hand during an independent writing task, but you don't really care or think it's important for students to have their pens in their hand. You might be like, oh, it's okay. In my classroom, if they want to take a break and put their pen down or whatever, that's absolutely fine with me. And so if you see the thing, but you don't understand why a thing matters, then you're not going to be able to make the change there. Okay? So that's the second, what I call change catalyst. The third is an understanding of what to do differently. So you might see that during your independent writing tasks, some students never pick up their pen. You might understand that that's a bad thing. That without their pen in their hand, they can't get any writing done. But you might not know what you can do differently. So you might not know that an effective way of dealing with that is to use the positive narration technique that I described earlier. And so if you can see it and understand it, but you don't know how to change it, change is not going to happen. And then the final catalyst is habits. And that's whether you have a habit to make that change. So it might be that you see the problem, understand why it's a problem, know exactly what to do differently, but actually currently, as I did when I was sort of early in my teaching career, my habit was to get cross and give a demerit. And so fundamentally, I'm kind of derailing my classroom every time I see something that's actually reasonably easy to fix. And so therefore, I'm not going to be able to make that change because I have a wrong habit in place. And so the idea behind responsive coaching is if this is why it's difficult for teachers to change, right? You pick something relatively small, like use positive narration. And when you get into it, it requires a serious amount of knowledge to be in place. Knowledge of what to look for, knowledge of why it matters, and knowledge of what to do differently. And even with all that knowledge in place, there's another factor, which is you need to help teachers with like kicking off the actual doing it in class, which is the habits piece, right? So that's my responsive coaching model. And then I guess the idea of the responsive part is that if I'm coaching you, Dan, and I'm going through my model, well, I might start off talking about our previous lesson. And I might be like, all right, Dan, so we agreed that we were going to look at kind of your classroom management. And we talked about how we were going to look at, helping students to start their tasks effectively. The moment you started off the first writing task, can you talk me through what you noticed? And you might say, well, it was great. Like, yeah, they all banged into it straight away. Everyone was working really hard within about a minute. And I'm like, well, I was sat at the back. And I saw nearly every student in the back row failing to pick up their pen when they were asked. And some of them really got nothing done in the 5-minute writing task. And so we have a misaligned mental model about what happened in that moment. And in that case, what responsive coaching says is that I need to be quite directive as a coach at that point. So I would need to be like, okay, Dan, well, actually, like I took some video, whatever it is, or I took some notes down and I'd like to share that with you. And I would then like share my mental model in the hope that we can kind of arrive at a point where we're actually in agreement. And I've had to give you some information to get you up to speed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It might be that I say, same question, well, tell me about that moment. You're like, yeah, you know what? It's really annoying. The whole of the back row don't pick their pen up in time and it's really slowing everything down. How can I do something about it? Now, in that event, your mental model of that is really strong. And so I don't need to coach you. I don't need to provide coaching, right? You've coached yourself. So I just need to be like, yeah, I saw that too. Let's talk about why that matters and what we can do about it. And so the coaching conversation is far easier at that point. So that's basically what responsive coaching is in these key areas of awareness, what did you see? Insight, why does it matter? And steps, what can you do about it? The coach asks questions before they give information. And those questions help to determine the quality of the mental model the teacher has in that area, and therefore the amount of new information the coach is required to share. So sometimes I do coaching, which is very listening. You know, if I'm coaching you in real life, you're going to know most of what you need to know. I do a lot of listening, maybe give you supply a little bit of information, and most of the work happens at the habit change level where we just put it into practice. Whereas if I'm coaching a completely new teacher, lots of the information is going to come from me as a coach. And it's just a helpful way of dictating the information heaviness of the coaching. Have I done a reasonably good job of explaining that?
You've done a very good job of explaining that, Josh. And I think my question there is, I know the analogy around teaching being a performative profession, and the whole idea that a doctor wouldn't go into a surgery and just try it for the first time. They'd have to practice it beforehand. That habit element feels like a part of it which is really difficult to overcome. So is becoming habit pure practice? What feeds into it becoming habitual?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's the area of coaching and just PD generally where like the ideas about it are the most confused. So one of the misconceptions I think is that like pure drilling in PD is enough to help teachers to be successful. And so like in the early days of me being a PD lead, when I'd be running some school PD and I'd be like, right, everyone, you know, I don't know what it is. No, we're going to rehearse some aspect of our questioning. Everyone get up in a pair and do it 50 times. And you know, like, actually, not only is that quite frustrating to some of the people in the room, because it feels a bit artificial, a little bit performative in itself, but in reality, like, it's not going to necessarily do that much of a job to help people to get better. So I think, in my opinion, the thing which helps to change habits, I would call it, well, a couple of things. The first of which is contextualized rehearsal. And then the second one is kind of implementation planning. And maybe I'll do those one at a time. So contextualized rehearsal. One of the, you know, I watch a lot of coaching, and something which always gives me the ick, and I imagine that you may have seen some of this stuff, is when rehearsal happens either in the context of the lesson that's already been taught and won't be taught again, or in a completely pretend context. So something I saw once is it was a bit of cold call practice based on some coaching, and the coach was like, okay, actually it was wait time being ask a question, give a significant pause to build the sense that students need to be thinking and provide space to think. So the coach was like, okay, so we're going to rehearse wait time. You know, you're going to think of a question to ask me. You could ask me about what I had for dinner yesterday. And so this poor teacher was like, what did you have for dinner yesterday, Dan? And I was like, oh God, I've got to get out of this room. So have you seen stuff like that yourself, Dan?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I've probably been that coach at one point.
And me.
But
And me.
because I think the misconception probably comes from maybe trying to create a safe space, but actually the reality is you create a quite awkward space.
Correct. And you're not, and it's a misconception about what you're trying to do there. Teaching someone to use a teaching technique isn't like training them to do a golf swing. Not that I play golf, but you get the point. Like, it's not pure muscle memory. It's not a physical skill, right? It's partially physical, but it involves a significant amount of like deep mental models to get it right. So the contextual part, the contextual change comes in the context in which you do a rehearsal. So in every single coaching session, no matter whether you're coaching someone on questioning, explanations, or classroom management, you must always, in my opinion, plan that rehearsal in the context of an upcoming lesson. And this is a subtle tweak, and we'll talk about why I think it does a better job of building habits in a bit. But that would be like, okay, Dan, well, we were going to work on your use of wait time. Can you talk to me through your next lesson with 8E? And you'd be like, well, yes, actually, I'm teaching them tomorrow. The lesson on similes. I'm an English teacher, so this is all I know about, right? So I'll be like, great, okay, well, can we open up the PowerPoint and have a little look? Fab. And then which moment in this lesson would you do your questioning? Okay, well, it's here. This is the activity that we'd be questioning about. I'd be like, okay, let's script the 5 or 6 questions you're going to ask. All of this is not rehearsal. This is planning. And we've looked at your lesson, we found the moment, we've scripted the questions. This is all just useful planning work that's going to help you be a better teacher more generally. And at that moment, I'd be like, okay, lovely, stick the PowerPoint up. We're now going to run this moment in your lesson and we're going to rehearse it. Now, at that moment, you're rehearsing your questioning, right? But let's think about what we've done. Number one, it's not gross, or it's certainly a lot less awkward because the thing you're doing is real. It's usefully real in the sense that it's just like, I'm going to be teaching this lesson tomorrow. It's definitely going to be helpful for me to have had a little pop at first. But the other thing we're doing is building a lot of cueing into the teacher's like mental model. Suddenly, the next time they get to that slide, we've now rehearsed your wait time. You're going to be like, oh yeah, cue. I asked this question. I'm cued to do wait time at this point. So we're actually doing, and that's where habits are built. That's the cue, a useful cue for you to execute that habit. And that's the thing that's going to make it likely that you actually encode it as a habit and you use it every single time, right? So that's the first important tweak, is that we do contextualized rehearsal, and the fact that we've done it in context builds in significant cueing, like habit cueing, like triggering the habit at the right time, and it feels more useful and it feels less gross. So that's the first thing I'd say.
What really struck me from that is, from my own experience, is where people tend to struggle is actually when to use some of those techniques. Does that feed into that whole responsive coaching model? So, for example, right, pull up your slide. Where should the wait time fit in? And there's just not that clear idea of when. How is that responded to?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, that's like, you're learning significant amounts about the teacher's subject knowledge and their kind of subject pedagogical understanding there, right? I'm like, okay, well, where's the moment where you're going to use questioning? And you're like, I don't really know. Well, at that point, pause coaching, well, not pause coaching, this is part of coaching, but pause the kind of going through the conversation in a stepwise way. I have loads of data as a coach. Well, that's interesting. I don't feel like you know where you're going to ask questions in your lesson, and that means you're not going to ask the questions in your lesson in a good way when you teach it for real, and that's really potentially problematic. Let's talk through the lesson. Well, that point I'd be like, well, what's the key knowledge here? What are you trying to convey? Well, I want to convey to students what the definition of a simile is. Well, that's interesting. Where's the moment where you teach that? Oh yeah, that's here. And how are you going to teach it? Well, I'm going to say this or that. And they'd be like, okay, well, what questions would it be useful to ask at this point? Oh yeah, well, I'd probably ask this, and this. And so I guess what I've learned there is I'm going to need to coach you towards even that understanding. And it might be that you had no idea and you don't really know what the knowledge is of that lesson. And you're like, oh, I think it's on similes, but I don't really know what I want to get out of it. At which point, I'm really pausing. We might not worry about wait time this week. We might just worry about you understanding your learning objective for tomorrow. And that's fine too, So I think it's just like, it feels to me to be pretty sensible, a way of making sure that coaching actually works by making sure you're plugged into, like, is the teacher ready for this thing?
I think that's it, isn't it? Because I think the danger is then you equip teachers with a set of approaches, but without the knowledge of how to use them and for what reason.
100%. And this is why coaching's really hard, right? Because I'm let's say I'm coaching a maths teacher, having got left it at my B grade GCSE maths and never done a sum again in my life. Then although I would feel very competent to coach this teacher in lots of areas of slightly more generic subject pedagogy, and and certainly classroom management and routines and all that stuff. If it comes down to like questioning, I might, if they have very weak mental models themselves around their subjects, I might not be the right person to coach them. And that is the nature of the beast, is if I feel like there's a big issue with them understanding of their lessons, I'm probably going to direct them to their head of department. And that's kind of that's the reality of the piece there, is that sometimes that does happen.
Do you think there should be considerations between how you would approach a novice teacher or a really experienced teacher? Because I feel like those conversations are probably had. SLT rooms around the country are thinking, oh, well, that person has been teaching for 20 years, therefore they're going to be less responsive to having responsive coaching. Is that a consideration, and is there a different approach to novice or expert?
Yeah, so like yeah, I've got two answers to that, and then because I want to talk about the novice expert distinction and how responsive coaching relates to that, and then I want to talk about the experienced versus expert distinction, which I think is very problematic. So yes, responsive coaching is like deliberately pointed at making sure that your coaching approach changes between a novice and an expert teacher. So what does expert mean? Well, expert means, I know you said experienced, and I will get to that, Dan. But what an expert is someone who has robust mental models in an area. That's like the definition, or one of the key definitions. And if someone has a robust, big, well-developed mental model in an area, that means that they most of the time can see what they need to in the classroom, because your mental model drives your awareness of what's happening. They can understand it very effectively, and they probably know how to fix problems when they arise. Like, that's the nature of expertise, is that you are the holder of solutions to your problems. So if you're coaching an expert with responsive coaching, it is a very open, dialogic, facilitative, these are all unhelpful coaching words, but people kind of get what they mean. It's a very facilitative approach, right? I'm asking questions, I'm not giving information necessarily, I'm kind of affirming, yeah, that sounds great. I might probe for detail. Oh, can you tell me a bit more about that? But like fundamentally, and that's how experts want to be coached. It's motivating to an expert to have to be coached in an open way. Actually, like there's a good amount of kind of science of learning stuff that suggests that it's really bad. It's bad for expert learning to supply lots of information when you're coaching. It's called the expertise reversal effect. It's basically like experts don't like to be given information because they already have it. And if you supply other information, they're having to compare two sets of information, and it actually slows their learning down. With a novice, the definition of a novice is they don't have mental models, right? So they don't know, and they're unlikely to see what they need to see in the classroom, and they're unlikely to understand it, and they're unlikely to know the solutions they're held. So at that point, my responsive coaching approach is going to lead me to be quite a bit more directive, and by that I mean supplying information, than with the novice teacher. And that's the right thing, because again, we know that for a novice, a facilitative coaching approach where they're required to get the answers themselves is very bad for their learning. It puts them under loads of cognitive pressure. The cognitive load's very high. They might eventually, once you sort of lead them around the garden path with your questioning, they might get the answer, but the amount of pressure you put them under, they're not going to have learnt from it. So that's what the evidence suggests. So my point there is that actually responsive coaching is designed to respond to the fact that in some teachers are a novice and some teachers are an expert, because your approach differs.
My question is around the making teaching a really attractive proposition as a job, and the retention and recruitment of teachers. And do you think this kind of plays directly into that?
Well, I mean, look, a teacher who is not getting better is not enjoying their job, right? In my opinion, it's frustrating not to improve. If you're struggling in the classroom, struggling with getting what you want, struggling with behavior, struggling with getting poor results year after year, whatever it is, you're not an autonomous professional that is loving their work. And I do think that this kind of the fact that PD, that helping teachers to improve constantly, is so difficult to do. It's so likely that a teacher's learning journey is that they get a bit better for like 2 years and then they just flatten out and never improve for the rest of their career, is one of the key reasons why teaching is not as, teachers are flooding out of the profession, because it's extremely frustrating. So I think that getting PD right, and I think that coaching is a really, really critical part of that. The evidence suggests that coaching is one of the only ways where we can provide PD that actually helps teachers to improve. I think it's critically important. The flip side of that is that sometimes a coaching approach can kind of turn into a sort of heavy accountability. Leaders walk around with a clipboard and they're like, "You're not doing wait time. I'm going to coach you on wait time," and that, which isn't coaching. It's sort of old style Ofsted high accountability, evaluative teacher development dressed up as coaching. That's not good for motivation either. Because like no one wants to have people breathing down their neck, and it's pretty obvious that that's unattractive. And we've probably both worked in schools of both those kinds. I've worked in schools where I'm not getting better and I'm annoyed and frustrated. And I've also worked in schools where leaders are breathing down my neck and make me feel uncomfortable the whole time. And neither of those things is attractive. The where we want to be is that there's PD in place that helps teachers to improve. And in fact, teachers are accountable for improving because they should be. It's an important job. You've got to get better. But that it's not done in a way that's like, just guess it yourself. But it's also not done in a way that's like, do this now or you're going to get fired. You know, it's not even, there's a line in the middle, which I think we need to sort of be at. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
No, it does. Yeah. Where do you stand on teachers who maybe they have a model they've used for years, and it's something which really works. It's an adaptation, perhaps, of a mental model, which is, let's say, through StepLab or something similar, and they're wanting to make adaptations to that. Do you think it's important that people can do that or have that autonomy of that? And is that then around them rationalizing why they're making those decisions?
Yeah. I mean, yes, absolutely. Using a technique just like the way the book says is not always the right thing, because teaching is a deeply complex job, and what works in one class and for one student isn't going to work in another class. That's the nature of the job. However, just to use a medical analogy briefly, to get to a point in another professional career, let's say being a doctor, where you are really adapting the techniques, it takes a long time, because a novice can't adapt. But by definition, a novice cannot adapt a technique. The way novices need to learn is extremely concrete, and then slowly the concrete becomes more flexible and abstract over a significant amount of time and practices and variations of use. So while I completely agree that teaching isn't about here's the rules, do it this way, I do think that coming to new teachers and saying, here's how to teach a lesson, do it this way, is the right thing. You should make it as easy as possible for and I say new, but what I mean is for inexpert teachers to teach well, which in itself is extremely hard. Even this is what we think is the recipe for effective teaching. That's years of work to get down. That is literally years of work to be good at, to understand your subjects the way you need to understand classroom management in the way you need to. Questioning, assessment. It's hard to just do the techniques the way the book says. But at the point where you can, then you start to adapt. That might be an unpopular view, but that's my view and that's the way I learned to be a teacher. To be fair, I was very happy to follow the rules, because after years of not having any rules, rules is completely the wrong word. I'm digging myself a ditch here, but I was happy to have guidance after 5 years of guidance-free classroom teaching. Finally, when someone said well, look, here's Teach Like a Champion, this is how you call for silence. This is how you, whatever it is. I was like, thank you. And I did it exactly like that. And then 5 years later, I started to tweak it and use it in my own way. How do you feel about that? And do you feel like that's your journey as well?
I think so, yes. This approach to teaching and learning and understanding the craft and the profession was not on my radar when I first started teaching, which is quite ironic, really, because I did what was a graduate teacher program. And so it was very much the whole basis of that was learning on the job as you were doing it with a mentor alongside. And I think my first few years of teaching just felt like potluck, to be quite honest with you, on whether I was getting things right or not. And sometimes I would get it right. And that's what kind of went into my repertoire but quite a limited repertoire of what was working. So I think it was quite a way into my teaching career where I felt that I was actually developing. I think what you described as the first couple of years of teaching, lots of growth. I don't think I felt like that. I think my first couple of years was survival, and then
Yeah, yeah.
eventually, it was probably quite maybe in my third, fourth year of teaching that the walkthrough books were discovered, and it became
It
a
was a
big
trick.
part of
Yeah,
school,
yeah.
and so that's probably my experience.
Yeah, and it's mine too, and it's mine too. I mean, you sort of get better in areas that you have to at first. Like, you sort of figure out how to not have kids just like throwing chairs at you, and get people in their seats a bit. But like, yeah, I had no guidance, and actually, there's a lot of teachers in the around the UK and around the world who have no guidance today. I mean, we feel like we've come a long way in PD, but actually, there's plenty of figure it out still happening. And for me, it's very inequitable to do it things that way. I've got a good friend called John Gilbert, who's the PD lead for the Two Counties Trust, and he talks about professional equity. It shouldn't be like that a teacher down the road has an amazing mentor and good PD. And so they fly in their first year, and they have a satisfying career and are more likely to stay in the job and get career progression. Whereas me in my school, poor PD time, I leave the job after 2 years and I'm like, I'm completely burnt out by it. And for the students of those teachers, it's even more inequitable. It shouldn't be a case of like luck whether a student is sat in a classroom in front of a great teacher, whereas in the classroom next door, there's someone who's never been shown how to do it properly. So I think like we're obliged to make information about how to teach effectively crystal clear. And again, it's not like ramming it down people's throats and being like, you must do it this way. But it is saying, look, we know that this is an effective way of teaching. Have a go at this way of doing it. Once you nail it, the world's your oyster. Do it how you want. But you got to pass through the professional standard first. That's my personal view about how learning to teach should be structured.
I have a question around simple model of teaching, which is often referred to through Step Lab. And how literal should we take that as a hierarchical model?
Good question. Not literally. I mean, just to describe the simple model of teaching, what we've done is broken down teaching into what we refer to as teaching problems. These are the problems that every teacher needs to face. So every teacher needs to create a classroom culture. That's our first problem. If you don't have a classroom culture in place, then the conditions for learning can't exist. And once that's in place, every teacher needs to learn how to secure attention, because attention is the gatekeeper of learning. And once attention's in place, every teacher needs to communicate clearly. And once clear communication's in place, you need to help students to think through. And then once they think, you need to work out whether they thought it effectively, which is gather and give feedback. And then once that's happened, you need to ensure that the learning's consolidated over time. Like, I think actually that's a pretty effective. I mean, that's my repurposing of Dan Willingham's simple model of memory. And so it is a model of how learning happens, right? Students focus their attention on the right thing. That right thing is explained, or on the teacher. The teacher explains perfectly clearly. The student thinks in exactly the right way, and so on. So, but what it is in terms of PD and actual teaching is it's a useful rule of thumb. So, I've been in situations lots of times where I'm coaching an NQT, just been, and you go in the first lesson, it's inevitably a bit of a car crash. And if for an inexperienced coach, it's quite tempting to like feature spot, or like, oh God, there's so much here. I'm just going to coach them on my favorite technique. My favorite technique is right pair share. I love right pair share just because I'm an English teacher and this is, so forget all that stuff. It's going to be right pair share. And so you end up with kind of very scattered coaching, which pings around and there's a bit of coaching on this and that. And that's okay, but it's not the perfect thing. And so what I try to do is impose a kind of structure by which you can, as a rule of thumb, trickle down and know roughly where to start with someone. So, there's no students aren't promoted to there is no quizzing. There's no feedback in the lesson. Students didn't think very hard. The communication was woolly and unclear. Students didn't really attend. Well, where might I start my coaching? Well, I might start my coaching on making sure students attend, because if I help coach the teacher on effective explanations, which would help them, but then they explain much better, but students are all tapping their pens and looking out the window, it's wasted time. But there's loads of situations where that wouldn't apply in a perfect way, which is why it's very importantly, it's a rule of thumb to guide a rough journey through a long-term coaching relationship with someone.
Thank you. It's something I refer to a lot, and I believe probably when I first saw it and used it, probably took it too literally. I think that general rule of thumb is a really sensible approach. Whilst we have you, I'd like to ask around about the Great Teaching Unpacked documentary.
Yeah.
And it felt different to other forms of PD. What was the reaction to that? Why was it decided to deliver the PD in that way? And is it something which you feel is an approach to PD which you would do again?
Yeah, I mean, so Peps McRae and I were talking, and we were, because Step Lab, we've put together like hundreds and hundreds, approaching thousands of little clips of teaching. We learned this from the Teach Like a Champion approach, which is my first exposure to clips of great teachers, and Step Lab's taken that on. But we had this worry, which was like, well, no one, you can often find a teacher that's never ever seen a really, really great lesson. I had never seen a really, really great lesson until I was lucky enough to go and visit loads of schools and join. It's the case that if you just joined a school and have never left, you've only seen what you've seen, and sometimes you never go and watch other people teach. You've just seen yourself. So what we set out to do was we wanted to film only a handful of really amazing teachers with proven outcomes at great schools, but show longer clips of their teaching from multiple perspectives. So I guess the most famous lesson from our documentary is Pritesh's science teaching, which a lot of people I think have seen. That's one lesson over 4 or maybe even 5 hours of documentary. And so we focus on the lesson from multiple perspectives. We show the same long clips over and over again to show the depth that you need to get to when you really want to look at how to be an effective teacher. I think that's why we did it. What's your take on it, Dan? Is that how it landed with you?
I've never thought about that before in terms of how many teachers have seen a great lesson from start to finish, and what are the opportunities of doing that. And that in itself, I think, solidifies why it's such a good approach.
Yeah. Well, that's the idea, that's the aim, and we did, it landed well. I don't think we got everything right. It's really hard. It's hard and expensive to make these documentaries. So, but we do have another one in the works, which is really exciting. But actually, one of the big main challenges we got was people were very happy with the documentary. We put it out for free, and it was our kind of contribution to the sector. But a lot of people were like, well, that's all right, Josh. You filmed at 2 schools. Reach, which is a very small startup primary. Well, it's easy to have great teaching in a small startup primary. What about my established 4th-form entry primary in with a high white working class population? And then the same thing with the secondary. It's like, well, this is like it was at Arc Soam, which is like Michaela V2. And again, it's a startup. Well, that's easy, but show us how we can do that at our turnaround special measures school. And so the next episode, we filmed at 1 school over 1 year. We filmed at a school with a very, very high disadvantage, not a startup, mostly white working class in Morecambe. And this is a school that is using PD very effectively to facilitate total results transformation and school improvement over a long period of time. And so we're going to be, in the summer, launching 4 episodes about how that school, the journey. And then this is not really focusing on quality of teaching. It's like we film 1 coaching relationship over the course of a year, to give you an example of one of the things we did there. So I'm super excited about it. Showing what happens when you just coach someone for a year is like, I don't think it's been captured before. So So it's gonna be fun when it comes out. Yeah. So that's the next thing.
Yeah, because it sometimes makes me laugh when on programs like Educating Yorkshire and the mentor has like a 2 minute conversation, like, you just like you need to stand on the door or
Yeah.
just you need to be in the classroom
Yeah.
and then you become a brilliant teacher
Yeah.
overnight.
Yeah. Yeah.
You spoke about Pat McCree, but you've also worked with Doug Lemov.
Yes.
How have those collaborations influenced your thinking and your approaches?
I mean, yeah, so Teach Like a Champion is at the heart of the reason why we do what we do. So I was lucky enough to be exposed to it pretty early, like when it just came out. It changed everything about my practice as an individual. Like I learned to teach from Teach Like a Champion. And then I was also lucky enough to visit, and if you ever, anyone who's listening, get the chance to go to a Teach Like a Champion one day of their training where Doug and his team come over, it's worth every penny, I can promise you, because the way they lead group professional development is incredible. And so, like, I was lucky enough to go to a few of those when I was first running PD, and it changed everything about how I ran PD in my school. They're not so big on the coaching side, which I got from other places, but on running effective one-to-many group PD that is mechanism rich and really has modeling and rehearsal and planning in it, they are the best. So I just feel very lucky to have learned from them, and then the chance to kind of work with the team, because they don't do coaching, we do coaching, so we can collaborate on that, and it's been a massive honor. But yeah, again, if you haven't read Teach Like a Champion, you've got to get hold of it because it is the book. And if you haven't been to a Teach Like a Champion PD, I would heartily recommend that.
So with the PD, despite like you say, so you say it's mechanism rich for effective professional development. What is it which really sets it apart?
So yeah, so they do PD on like that. They pick like one technique. So one group of techniques. So let's say what they call the what to do cycle, which is essentially the call for attention, deliver instruction, hold to account, which is fundamental to teaching, right? Hello, everyone, look this way. The next task is start. Is everyone doing it? It's what it means to be a teacher in a lot of ways. So they run a one-day training on that. So what do they do well? The quality of the modeling. So they show a model, they show multiple models, and then the way they get you to pick it apart, the way they ask you the right questions to draw your attention to the key features of the model is the best in the world. The way they get you to plan into your own context is where I learned loads of that from. But the best thing is the way they get you to rehearse. So they would never get you to rehearse before modeling exactly how the rehearsal should look. So multiple times in the day, you get Doug and his team rehearsing the thing on stage that you're just about to rehearse. And then they're like, go. And you're like, well, I know exactly what to do now. And I've seen the bosses do it and they weren't embarrassed. So I'm not going to be embarrassed. And so it's so clear from beginning to end that you can't fail to learn from it. I think that's whereas sometimes you can plan PD and it's a bit woolly and people have to do a bit of the figuring out themselves. And then you're like, go and rehearse. And then they're like, well, I don't know how. And then that rehearsal at the end falls apart a bit. They just do so much to make sure that every moment is incredibly clear. And so if you're leading PD in a school, it's like seeing that as a model of how to do great PD equipped me to go and do the same thing in the PD that I led.
Yeah. So I can see that influence then in the Step Lab group PD builder. So I
Correct.
went on the Step Lab intensive training day in London, and that was kind of my takeaway from that on how the model was delivered on stage multiple times. And that really kind of took me back was how you can equip so many people in one go with that simple structure. So if you were to think about one thing which you wanted schools to stop doing, which would improve teaching quality, what would that be?
Yeah, there's so many, sir. But I think it's like stop making unhelpful noise. So what I mean by that is like for teachers to get better, the thing they need to get better, you want them to get better at, needs to be incredibly clear, and there can only be one thing. And so oftentimes you go and visit a school and it's like, what are all the focuses? And it's like, well, okay, we have our behavior focuses here, and then this is the assessment one, and we're also doing a curriculum revamp and this and that and that. And all the leaders are fighting for their own bit of time, and that's understandable because everyone has their thing they're looking after, and everyone cares about their thing doing well. But the ultimate, what happens for the staff is that they experience being told that 15 things are the most important thing. And so ultimately no one gets better at any of the things. So it's got to be, like, for me, the most important thing an SLT can do is make a concerted effort behind the scenes at SLT briefings to be like, right, what is the one thing that we care about, and how are we all going to make that one thing happen from our own perspective? Right, so the messaging can be different. It can be the behavior message and the English head of English message and the whatever send message, but the heart of the thing, the focus, needs to be the same for everyone. And if it's not, your staff ain't going to improve their jobs. That is kind of my feeling about it.
Is that still manageable if you're in a school which has got to make rapid improvement and under intense scrutiny? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So like, so it's obviously a bit glib me saying that, but in reality, I think, having worked in schools a bit like that you actually end up making quicker improvement by focusing on one thing at a time in a very intensive way. So if it's like, well, we got to crack corridor behavior, then that should be the focus, and there should be no focus on anything else. But but obviously, like, having actually been a leader, yeah, it's easier said than done to do it that way. But I think so. But trying to limit as far as possible the focus, I think, has to be the answer.
Things don't happen by chance, but actually my experience is it does have that domino effect on other areas. And even if that domino effect is just people being more aware. So if you're looking at like a think, pair, share structure, then teachers do start to think about other structures within their classroom. So I think it does have
agree more.
Yeah, it does have that ripple effect.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Well, it's been a joy to speak to you, Josh, and it's been like my own personal PD session, really. I've learned so much, and it's just great to get that insight on, that effective PD, and I think it'll be really useful for our listeners to hear.
It's been a pleasure talking with you, Dan, and